The absolute way of living. Chapter 4. The Ant. Bat was scared at the outcome of the mole. Her beliefs led to her doom, beliefs that she would have rooted for. But there she lay dead and out of all luck. Bat quietly flew away after the hunter had buried the mole. Being in a company might be the answer, she said to herself. After a day or two of rest, she decided to test that theory with the ant. In a nearby nest lived a colony of ants. Every day you could see them go about their busy lives gathering food for store. These were the ant and her siblings. They were very eusocial and rarely seen alone. They were taught the power of togetherness, and very potent it is, they would say. They were taught to depend on the strength of one another for survival, for individually, they stood no chance against those who would harm them. No wonder it said that, the fingers may stand apart powerless, but together they make a fist. For they had to provide for and protect themselves and their queen. A very lazy queen, whose sole purpose was to eat and breed, but who was of great importance to the colony. Bat had to change her tactics, for the ant was not a nocturnal animal like her. It was quite difficult at first, but the bat adjusted. Every morning, she would watch them go to work. Every evening, she would watch them come back to the nest with loads twice their size. These were hard-working insects to the admiration of the bat. Very hospitable were the ants. They would welcome anyone who came in peace to their home, provide food and interesting conversations. Bat used this to her advantage. She would go to the nest of the ants at night and sit in their company. They always had something to talk about, and they had all the information of the forest. They knew the latest news of births and deaths in the forest. They even told the bat of the death of the mole, with an accurate tale of what happened to the shock of the bat. Bat employed her tactic of questioning before observation. She asked the ants the reason for their togetherness. "Why do you like company?" the bat asked. "We are eusocial." "And it's for a reason," the ant answered. This had been an issue of heritage, the ant continued. For it had been known. First, before we came into existence, our ancestors were not like this. They were very separate in their dealings. They built castles for their queens, ensured their comfort, but stayed in their own homes, fending for themselves and their immediate families. Because of that, they had several invasions from their enemy, the spider. It was then that the decision of staying together in one nest was made. A decision which had been adhered to, through the generations to our time. We have made it a norm to follow the directives of our ancestors, for they taught us that company was our only means of survival, and they surely were not wrong. Many weeks had passed since the last meeting between the ants and the bat. She was surely convinced that their way was the absolute way of living, for she had carefully thought about it and was sure this time. The day was troublesome. There had been a rainstorm and many of the trees were uprooted, talk less of the disaster on the ground. The place had flooded, displacing many animals. The nest of the ants suffered too, and many perished in the flood. Those who survived were washed to far places. The once strong fortress of the ants was now a scattered ruin. The ant was one of the few to survive. She had been washed off to a strange location, strange to her because she had never wandered that far into the forest. The ant was now all alone with no shelter and family. Ever since she was born, she had never been away from company. She was a worker ant, whose task was to look for food. A work she did almost all of her life. She didn't know how to build or fend for herself, for she didn't have to. Now, she was all alone, a small insect in a very big forest. The ants were taught to depend on each other, but were never taught how to survive on their own. Never were they permitted to leave the nest to try other things. Everyone was expected to be loyal and obedient to the directives of the wise elders. But is wisdom age-bound? Though it is said, what the elders see from the ground, children will not see even from the highest mountain. But none of the older ants had ever experienced situations where they were displaced from home and company. Their structured systems of dependence on each other gave them limitations to their abilities, thus making them vulnerable when alone. If it was not for the timely intervention of the squirrel, the sparrow would have had the ant for her supper. Though the law of survival was broken by the squirrel, the gratitude of the ant was worth the risk. The squirrel helped transport her back to other survivors from her colony. Later that night, after narrating her ordeal to the bat, she ended with this statement: "Company is survival, but only to an extent. Being on one's own is equally as important as being in a company. Company can be self-limiting. Let's not be naive, my brothers and sisters, but learn. Only the wise know when to balance the two."